Hello everyone, this is Paul Feldman. I am down here in Washington, D.C. with Mike Tripsis, and he's the founder of CreativeOne, and he's also behind at least 45 different annuity product designs. And so today we want to talk to him about product design for annuities. So Mike, tell me, what goes into creating an annuity product?
There are traditional actuarial principles. The primary difference with fixed indexed annuities, and I can't believe it has been 29 years since I and a few others at the same time in the industry started thinking about how fixed annuities could evolve, given that in about 1994, I think, variable annuities first passed in sales fixed annuities. Fascinating product, had lots of upside potential. Money Magazine was running hot back then, and so securities, and in particular equities, were the big thing. Great idea. So I started thinking, you know what? The fixed annuity itself, underneath the standard non-forfeiture law, with two modifications, could actually work, still remain fixed, not a variable product. The one thing is that the money that the companies credited based off of their bond earnings, et cetera, could be transformed using options into something that could have a large upside, potentially. It could have a zero in a year as well. So we designed those first products, but the second thing that needed to happen to keep it underneath insurance and not securities is you had to have an underlying guarantee. So that underlying guarantee was actually lowered so that over the long term, I think back then it was 87% at 3% was the minimum guarantee. If you had a series of zeros, hardly ever happened historically, then eventually that one would kick in. It did not explode right away, and designed it for the first company, went down to work at a IMO of all things. I thought, what is an actuary going to do in an IMO? But since we had a new nascent product, we took it to a number of different insurance companies, and it turned out to be a great development. Slow, much slower than I thought.
Everything always is.
Yeah, I know. I'm twice former chairman of NAFA, but I think it was probably 2001. I didn't keep a log, unfortunately. I should have diaried better. I gave a keynote speech to the big NAFA get-together, which I think was 30 people, and three things I said really need to happen if this product is going to find its place between an outright security you can actually lose money in, and the traditional fixed annuity with its steady interest rate, fixed interest rate. Number one, we had to clarify terminology. It was all over the place, and that's natural. And we got there, took a long time. Secondly, we had to inform regulators, inform other agents, inform other IMOs, frankly, to not misrepresent the product. Don't show big Standard & Poor's 500 with dividends, upsides. That's not what you're going to get. You want to get that type of thing, get a variable annuity or buy the equities. And the third thing was, no offense to the smaller companies that I was designing for at the time, but we needed bigger names, bigger acceptance on the larger, more household names that people were familiar with. That took a long time. But in the 2000s, a lot developed, continued development, honestly, development of the guaranteed income in the product, and then the development of volatility-controlled indexes. Two huge developments that I think finally convinced a lot of these larger, older line companies to not battle us regulatorily, judicially, actually, in a few areas. And all of a sudden, you know what? If it's looking good, then all of a sudden it's ours too. And that's kind of where we're at today.
Yeah, it's kind of exploded. I mean, from that first annuity. So when you design an annuity, what is it, when you look at it, you have an actuarial background. What does it take to come up with this? Like, how do you, what are some of the factors that you look at?
But I mean, the traditional factors that you would use in annuities, life insurance, et cetera. Obviously, mortality is in there. You have withdrawal, you have income or payout, and you make assumptions on those. You generally test it over many scenarios on the front end. With the indexed annuity, you have to test it with potential returns off of the options that get credited to the policyholders. And so there are some fairly sophisticated methods to do that. A lot of them pioneered on Wall Street, Black-Scholes methods and formulas. So yeah, the initial days, I did a lot of it on spreadsheets, of all things. And they're much more sophisticated actuarial softwares. There was back then too, but they didn't accommodate what we needed for design of fixed indexed annuities. And they used to be called equity indexed annuities. That was the other thing on the terminology that really needed to change to reduce confusion, and certainly regulators preferred that as well.
Yeah, we have to think about the regulators when you talk about annuities. So when you design a product based on options, like, what do advisors need to know? What do IMOs need to know about explaining how? Because there's how many indexes are there nowadays? Like for annuities, maybe 100.
I think it's 100 or 120. Yes.
Yeah. So what do people not understand that they should?
Well, a simple, original, and traditional approach. S&P 500. You might have had a base charge, so that if the S&P was up 10% for the year, and there might be a 3% haircut on the, if you could visualize it in terms of a person or an item, it would be like cutting the feet off of the option. The reason for that is you can't have everything and no downside, obviously. And these options needed to be purchased, structured options, not that you read about in the newspaper or on your Schwab account, but ones that are specifically structured to the design requirements of the fixed indexed annuity. There could be a cap, it's like cutting the head off of the return, or they credit an interest rate. I even hate using the term return because it sounds like a security.
Yeah.
It's a credited interest rate based on the formula and the performance of the particular index. Or there is like the dividing the baby, if you will, participation rate. Get part of the upside. Or there could be combinations of those things. And so those are built into the product. A little more, and the insurance company goes out and buys them in batches. So perhaps all of the issues that week get set the starting point, and then the ending point a year later generates the return based on the adjustments. And the company buys almost exactly, generally, and gets an exact match, which the insurance regulators really appreciate. Well, they more than appreciate it. It's pretty much required. So that there is a match and the company's not at risk. The company's also not carving off money and reaping it into their profits. They're buying what they can with the budget that they have coming off the bonds that generally most of their portfolio is invested in. So the evolution of the product has made things a little more complicated beyond the guaranteed income benefits that are in there, which also need to be priced out. And that's a longer term process and subject to more variation, but that's part of the actuary's duty. But beyond that, these volatility controls came about as a result of long period of low interest rates. As you know, the last, I don't even know, a dozen years, when we started designing, insurance companies were making 7% plus on the bonds, so, and crediting 5%. Once they take their spread off and they have that amount to spend, that got down to be very, very low, particularly as we hit the nadir here just a couple years ago. So the thought was, well, you know, a 30% participation rate doesn't sound very good anymore. It doesn't sell as well, maybe not as high a value, although in that interest rate environment it could be reasonable, not very marketable or salesy. So the thought was, you know what, how about if we have a combined approach that the money could move in and out of just bonds or money market or short-term instruments, but back into the index itself if volatility was lower. So volatility got high, options got more expensive, it would shift out on some periodic basis. It's a great concept, and it worked very well, but that morphed ultimately into all the things you see today, which, I mean, many different types of indexes, many different types of shifting in and out to take advantage of low volatility and not get hurt by high volatility. And so that's, I mean, this is Wall Street's expertise. I guess I should also say not every firm buys structured options from the street. There are a number of companies that have large enough volumes and internal investment departments enough that they do their own hedging for the particular type of option that they need.
Mm-hmm. So what is the next step?
Next steps are, frankly, still, even after all this time, after I think the first issue was probably 28 years ago, after we were developing, to gain more public acceptance, more acceptance in the markets, rather than anything specific, groundbreaking, like GMIBs were, or like these low volatility indexes were. It is positioning the product. And there's some great work that's been done by Wade Pfau and a number of others on appropriately, I think, setting up nomenclature to identify it as a bond alternative. And it really is in most senses. The bonds that a lot of people have, 30/70, 40/60, or whatever they are, in a design portfolio by a financial planner or an RIA or an IAR. Bonds have their own risks. And we just saw some of that with the rise in interest rates. As long as somebody didn't bail out or there weren't big switches, they probably didn't take losses. Although the odd thing about mutual funds is if other people take losses, you get to participate in that. So as opposed to more structured bonds, it's not. It doesn't have the upside potential of equities or of the partial equity that's effectively built into a fixed indexed annuity. It does have downside, a bond does, which the annuity does not. Zero is your hero. It can't go any lower than that. And there's just no historical probability, well, just using S&P, of having a long run of zeros. You're going to get some returns. And you have the underlying guarantee, which is more like 90% at 1% right now. So it is a different animal. You could call it a hybrid. It's its own animal, I would like to say, having designed the first one, or one of the first ones. And so it can occupy a specific place. Not everybody has still bought into that, not that they have to, but it should be, in my opinion, more prevalent in IARs, RIAs. And then someday there's some structural hurdles to it, but you may actually find it in 401ks. There's some reasons that might not happen, and some distribution might not like that because they don't play in that space. In fact, most of our distribution doesn't play in that space. They play in the space where the funds come out at retirement, potentially, and there really is not much there right now at all for guaranteed income in 401ks.
Do you think that there's too many indexes? And does that cause confusion in the marketplace?
Are there too many auto makes and models? I don't think it causes confusion in the marketplace. I think it causes confusion in distribution.
Yes.
Because the client is not going to see 120 different indexes from 50, 60 different companies. Explanation of that index and that effectively volatility controlled with some other different indexes, many different indexes in combination, and then with the RILAs, which are securities, and that is the latest development, that have some downside potential, but it's floored. Those kind of things take a little bit longer for distribution to wrap their heads around, for IMOs and companies to help educate them, understand the story, and then be able to relate it in simple terms to a client. And then there is the issue of tools, backcasting, forecasting, etc., which gets into a dicey area with respect to suitability and representation. So agents need to be careful what they're saying, stick to the script of the explanation of what this is, why I like it, how it's been good for my clients. Recent actual history is probably the best thing to do, but so many of them are so new that, what do you have, a year and a half of experience in history, right?
Mike, we covered a lot today, and I really enjoyed our conversation. I could sit here and talk to you for way longer.
Okay, let's go.
But we'll pick this up next time.
All right.
Definitely.
Look forward to it.
And thank you so much for being here.
Appreciate it.
Yes.